The left isn't going down without a fight here in the final weeks before the election. We've seen so much from them in the way of the January 6th insurrection hearings. And finally, the polls, I think, are getting through to them that people recognize this is all a distraction at best. It's lunacy, really. But doesn't mean they're not going to keep pushing, because there is a segment of the Democrat Party, I would say the base, maybe it's 30 or 40% of Democrats, who will never be satisfied until Trump and everybody who worked for Trump at a senior level is in handcuffs. They've been promised this for years. They got to get sent to prison. Or else the MSNBC watching, unhappy ladies at home and guys will never be satisfied with the situation, Clay. And that is why we have Steve Bannon today sentenced to serve 4 months in prison because he defied a subpoena. This is how they say it. I'll explain this in a second. From the House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. This is 4 months. Now, he's appealing, and he's out until the appeal is heard. So it's not like Steve is currently sitting in a cell for 4 months. Do you know Bannon, by the way? I know Bannon a bit, met him a few times.
I don't think I've ever met Steve Bannon.
Look, Steve's he's a showman, and he's a fighter. His crime, though, here, quote,
super
crime,
smart, brilliant guy,
he's
by
a smart
the way,
guy,
too.
yeah. He came into the Trump campaign in 2016 at a critical moment, and he is credited by people in the room as saying, even on what they call Billy Bush Monday, when they released that video, Bannon was like, stay the course, we're 100% going to win. He was that guy, and when you're that guy in the history books, that goes a long way. But because he's that guy, the psycho libs hate his guts. I mean, they hate his guts. He wasn't a moderating influence on Trump in the White House. He wasn't somebody who still gets invited to the cocktail parties or whatever. No, there's only a few of those. Bannon was the base's representative in the Trump administration in the early days in that White House. Now, this is a crime, and I mean, it's technically, it is, as a matter of statute, Congress can do this. This is a crime that hasn't been charged in 40 years. The person who was charged 40 years ago, I think, was acquitted of contempt of. Remember, people are getting this confused, too. This isn't lying under oath. This isn't some of these other process crimes that they've been using against Trump people. This is Congress says you have to show up and talk about this thing, and Bannon's like, no, I'm not going to show up. It's Congress. It's purely through Congress. And his defense was, look, this is all under executive privilege, my conversations with the president of the United States. He has asserted executive privilege. The system says that you can't just have me testify about everything I told the president. They want to send him to prison for 4 months anyway. Now, Clay, we know brand-wise and everything else, here we are sitting talking about Steve Bannon, and he is a showman, and he's not shy about liking attention. But I stand with Bannon on this one. He's part of our team. He's part of our fight. And if they can, they'll send him away for 4 months because they're lunatics.
I agree with the principle of the stand because he could have shown up, I believe legally, immediately taken the fifth, and basically refused to answer any question of the congressional committee and had the same default perspective. With all that in mind, I think this is the best thing that could happen to Steve Bannon. And I think he did it as a method to show how radical and overreaching Democrats actually are. Because, Buck, this is one thing that I think we had Carrie Lake on yesterday, and she was great with us, but she's been great on this. We got to have more people willing to fire back about Democrat excesses when it comes to arguing over the threats to democracy. What's a bigger threat to democracy, Buck? The sitting president having his chosen attorney general raid the home of a former president. The January 6th committee, 2 years after January 6th, being willing to put people in prison because they won't talk to them. The fact that there are still January 6th political prisoners in solitary confinement sitting in Washington, D.C., who have yet to face charges and have been now in prison for approaching 2 years. The fact that we've got raids going on right now from our FBI grabbing up people who had the audacity to protest outside of abortion clinics while they haven't managed to arrest anyone for firebombing right-to-life centers. If you really truly cared about threats to democracy, all of what I just laid out is far more radical and far more dangerous to our country than what happened on January 6th. And I stand with Steve Bannon for his decisions here. But I also think, Buck, I think he and his calculus is saying, okay, if they're going to send me to prison for 4 months, Martha Stewart went away to prison for, I think we looked it up, 5 months for insider trading and came right back out of prison. It was like the best thing that could have happened to her brand.
Actually, some interesting backstory to this, because I talked to Rudy Giuliani about this from when he was back in the prosecutorial side before he was mayor. He knew Comey. Comey, as in James Comey of Russia collusion, was the U.S. attorney who pushed the prosecution of Martha Stewart. And it wasn't about insider trading. It was about her lying about a phone call to FBI investigators. But it's interesting.
But it was related to an insider trading investigation, right?
Her broker called her and said, I think we should dump this stock. And there was a broader insider trading investigation. Her broker's allowed to call her and say, I think we should dump the stock. She, though, said basically either we didn't talk about it or he didn't call me, I forget. But it was about the lying about the phone call, not the actual insider trading. And James Comey decided to make an example of her. Why? I just bring this up because Comey had aspirations to be a big national political figure. By the way, if he wasn't a lanky, unself-conscious weirdo, I think he'd run for president. Like, he's one of those delusional narcissists who thinks people like him because he's just been sliming his way through the bureaucracy his whole life. But that was who and he's a lawyer, but he's not an FBI guy. He's a lawyer. People always forget this.
So Martha Stewart came right out, went back into a television show. I think she and Snoop Dogg have all these products that they do together now. I don't know if Snoop Dogg has ever actually served any time in prison, but if I remember correctly, I think Snoop Dogg was charged with murder back in the day. Bigger picture. Steve Bannon, I believe, recognizes that he can be the poster child for Democrat overreach here. And if the potential fallout is he has to go to prison for a couple of months to prove how much they are overreaching, it's a choice that he's willing to make.
Yeah, sure. For his brand, I mean, he'll stand on principle on this one. And by the way, Bannon is right here. I mean, that's the other part of this, too. It's not like you and I like Steve and what he stands for, so we're just going to defend him. He's right on the merits. I mean, this is what they're going to make him show. Congress going to make him show up. He just pleads the fifth. What's the point of this? Holding him in contempt. Eric Holder was held in contempt and laughed at it. I mean, the notion that anyone's going to lock up Eric Holder when he was the attorney general under Obama, people thought that was a joke. Same exact law at issue. Same exact power could be used here. But Clay, this goes to the broader issue, which is that they use the people who are constantly whining about how our democracy is under threat. They are the greatest threat to our democracy.
Yes.
They use the law as a weapon of politics, as a matter of course. This is standard operating procedure for them now. Sure, they're doing this to Steve Bannon, who's, a famous millionaire with, lots of followers, and so people are going to say, well, he'll be fine. You see, they sent away this former UCLA student. It's getting almost 4 years, and he's serving it in federal prison. I mean, he's going away. This guy, Christian Secor, who was one of the people who walked into the U.S. Capitol, but he sat in Nancy Pelosi's chair. Now, what I think is so important for everyone to know here, no one believes that Christian Secor did anything violent, didn't attack cops, didn't threaten anyone. He walked in the Capitol as part of a mob, sat in Nancy Pelosi's chair, and his life is basically over now. I mean, he's branded a insurrectionist for all time. So he's going to have to probably move out to rural part of a red state and go off the grid just to have some peace and quiet. He's going to serve almost 4 years in federal prison, Clay.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I hope when Republicans take back control of the House and Senate, they're going to have an investigation into the January 6th investigations and prosecutions. I really do hope that. I would also point out that Democrats are very poor at analyzing the larger precedent that they are setting by their actions. So there are going to be a lot of Republicans suddenly who have the power of the gavel, who have the power of subpoena in both, I believe, the Senate and certainly the House. And, Buck, what are they going to do when some of these Democrats that they want to haul in front of them and put under oath and ask questions refuse to appear? What are right now we have seen Democrats have set the precedent that if you don't show up to testify in front of a congressional committee, you can go to jail for it. I'm curious, Buck, how many witnesses who are called that might be left-leaning or Democrats are going to suddenly face similar consequences. Now, the reality, unfortunately, is it's not just that Democrats are using the law to their best devices. It's that, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve Bannon was in front of a D.C. jury, right? You are able to get Republicans in front of a jury that votes 95% or 90% Democrat and basically hammer them for their politics and get convictions in a way that Republicans do not have the same jury pool to be able to rely on for any charges that they may bring, as we just saw in a lot of the Steele dossier Durham-related prosecutions. The jury matters. That's why there's always, Buck, for lawyers, there's always a rush to choose the forum. You know, there's a term for it, forum shopping. Where you file a case oftentimes can dictate who has a strategic advantage, and Democrats have that strategic advantage.
Right, because the location of the federal government is in D.C., and therefore it's going to end up in the D.C. court system or even the D.C. federal court, or a court of appeals. So, you know, what we have here, Clay, is that the District of Columbia is a deep state stronghold, as we all know. They can always count on it, and so that's why – I mean, look at just the last 6 months. So they're sending away this UCLA kid, and there's so many January 6 defendants, and I'm just going to say it, not enough prominent people on the right, including those in elected office, speak out about what's going on with these J6 defendants. Sure, some of them broke the law, and they should face consequences. They shouldn't face unreasonable consequences, and they shouldn't be imprisoned for months and months without trial as part of a gulag detention system that they're only doing against J6 people, but also now with Steve Bannon, with the Mar-a-Lago raid. Look at all of the lawfare that they wage against our side. What is the equivalent? Like, I would actually almost want one of these MSNBC or CNN contributors to come. What is the equivalent on the right exactly? Where are we prosecuting some? I mean, Democrat politicians only get prosecuted when they're caught with like 3 hookers, a bag of Coke, and $100,000 in cash that they've stashed from a bribe in their freezer somewhere. Like, that's what Democrats get prosecuted for. Our side, it's, the emoluments clause.
I think that you will see, and we've donated on this show. We've had the political prisoner discussion in a big way. I donated I think it was almost $10,000 to those political prisoners of January 6th to be able to get better attorneys. I think after the midterms, Buck, you will see a lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate who aren't afraid to address that right now. I think they made the political calculation. I agree with you. I wish they'd been more aggressive, but I think a lot of them made the political calculation that with everything going on, they don't want to fight the battle of January 6th with Democrats. Once this midterm is over, I think you'll see a pivot, and there will start to be a lot of people asking about the treatment of these political prisoners.
I mean, I think people could have made more of a due process argument. I think former President Trump I think former President Trump could be more vocal about the due process rights of people that are being mistreated in that day. I'm just going to say it. I think there are a number of people who could speak out on this one.
We've done it on this show. I would agree with you.